I'm merging with, oh, no! Rising Sun, Blood Rage. And now, for the final installment, we got Ankh, this final installment of the Eric M. Lang trilogy of area control, and this guy Ankh is for 2 to 5. In Ankh, this guy, you will have this merging mechanic where you're literally merging with other players 2/3 through the game. Will Ankh's complete lack of randomness mixed with streamlined combat be worthy of the prestige of these two games? Well, let's go. Here's a real quick how to play Ankh. Everyone is controlling an Egyptian god. Yes, this could be you, Ra. And these gods are on the board, moving around and fighting next to their warriors, which you're also controlling. The goal is to reach the top of this devotion track, which is basically VP, and whoever reaches the end first wins the game. To get Egypt to give you that much devotion, you want to be doing two main things. Either winning battles and bloodying the sand with the gore of your opponent's armies, or owning these control points called monuments. If you have the most of each type of monument in a region, you get points right before you fight. So here, if I have 2 obelisks and he has 1, I get 1 point before fighting. Every turn, you're gonna have 2 actions, and that's all on this action track that everyone shares. So when anyone does an action, they just move this Egyptian guy to the right. And you always gotta do these from top down. So first I can move figures, and then I can summon figures, not the other way around. The other 2 actions are really simple too. You can gain followers, whereas where you increase your follower count, yeah, kind of funny. But then once they follow you, you're gonna be cutting up and sacrificing them. They're like money to us Egyptian gods. You'll spend them for the last action, which is to research an Ankh power, which is like a permanent technology upgrade. You're moving these markers right for a reason. That is, when you get to the end, you get something good. You get to trigger an event. So you do your action, then you get to do an event. And most of these are getting monuments. When you trigger this, if you're next to a monument, there you go, you get it now. The main thing here is that enough events will happen and eventually a conflict will begin, where every region will fight. You go from the lowest number region and fight in each. Every single mini has 1 power. Then both players play a card from the hand that can add power. Whoever has the highest strength wins the fight, gets 1 devotion for winning, and obliterates all their enemies. So players will take turns doing actions, sometimes triggering events, and eventually the game will progress all the way to here, whereas where a big change happens. Here there's this big god merging thing where the last 2 players merge on top of each other to form 1 god. With 2 gods becomes 1. 1 player is going to lose all their units, but that's not really a big deal because they're a team now. And then after that, after the merging, the game just continues on as normal, with that merged god just being way stronger. And that's all you need to know about the game for now. Once anyone reaches the end of that devotion track, the game immediately ends and they win. So now on to the actual review, and whew, yeah, this game does make a statement on the table. For the sake of simplicity, we're only covering the base game components and not the Kickstarter stuff exclusives, which is right there. So back to this game, you are controlling a big god. Like, look at these minis. These are huge. They're, oh my gosh. Yeah, your huge, gigantic self just towering over everything just lets you leverage your godliness over these normal warrior soldiers. Oh, and later in the game, you're getting these monster minis too. There's also going to be camels that pop up later in the game that are minis themselves. Every single god is going to get a clear player board and distinctly backed cards that is all splayed next to this big map of ancient Egypt, complete with the River Nile streaming down the middle. Plus, you can just flip over that player board for a sick background on that Egyptian mythos. You even got a nice plastic token for VP. And on this action track, we really like these stands for the different action markers. And you can easily pick them up from across the table and just see what step they're on. So now you're jumping into the game. And we have to say we actually had a pretty good time with the rulebook. It's sequenced pretty logically, there's lots of examples, and there's a great summary at the back. These player aids too just really help. They list all the actions and even give a nice ordering for fighting that you can easily flip to when that whole phase comes about. Admittedly, there is no fact, but there's only actually one question that stumbled us during gameplay, and that was pretty edge case anyways. So now you've donned your Egyptian god, and you're ready to play the game. And then when you play, you realize that, whoa, this action track, this is built different, man. Ankh just stands apart by making every action directly tied to everyone else. And by doing a certain action, you may be giving your opponent an event earlier. The fact that every single player is always tied to each other just makes you want to watch what your opponents are capable of. It also frequently gets you excited for the person before you, to see if they will move something to the place right next to triggering an event, because then you get the option on your turn. What action to move up is the fun question, as it's all easy to keep track of and is a nice visual to see the game literally moving forward. So that's all pretty basic, but now let's get into the conflict system, which is where Ankh really starts to feel more like Ankh. See, it's called a conflict system, not a battle system, because these set of cards you're playing for conflict are pretty nuanced that they can feel like a set of another actions in a different phase. So yeah, you got your power cards, like chariots, +3 damage, right? Woohoo! But then you got this card, Build Monument, which completely blows it open because instead of adding damage, you're not adding damage, you're spending followers to build and take control of a monument where you're fighting. Building during fighting. This is clever because an action as swingy as this wouldn't have done well in the action track, where people building constantly without much consequence would be too strong. Here, if you build a monument, well, you're getting smacked for it. You probably lose the fight, giving your opponent a point, and your troops will die. Now the other interesting part about this card system is this guy. The Swarm of Locusts, the Plague, where you go, ah god, I'm unleashing a giant swarm, who can send enough meat for this meat grinder so our troops don't die? No, but like really, this is where a minigame gets unlocked, where you secretly bid followers, and whoever doesn't bid the most just gets completely wiped out. And don't tie while bidding, because if you do so, everyone just dies. Oops. When played in a fight with multiple people, it can make people with very few units actually very relevant, as they can unleash a mind game to drain the follower count of the bigger armies. But if anyone's familiar with Eric M. Lane games, sometimes you do want to die. See, there's a card called Miracle, which is a godly miracle that actually gives you points for every unit you lost, including from these disgusting locusts. So now I'm profiting off of dying. Or maybe that Plague of Locusts is gross, because I want to win really hard. This drought gives me literal devotion points for each figure I have on a desert. I just gotta win the fight, so yeah, I really gotta make sure I win. The variance on what can happen during conflict just makes it a fun mind game as you try to predict what direction the other people are going in. Do they actually want to seriously fight me? So then I should play my +3 card so I don't lose units? Or maybe they're just building a monument? If they're not going that hard, then I should just play this cycle card myself, so then I can get all my cards back for the next battle. And speaking of discards, you can actually see everyone else's discard and keep track of their stuff well because everyone has the same cards. And you really want to keep that in mind because you don't want to get hit by a Plague Locust at the wrong time, because Plague Locusts happen before fighting. So for you, it doesn't always necessarily matter how many units you have, just if you can play the card game right too. But funny thing about conflict is that everyone fights in each region, no matter where they are. So someone could be all the way over here, and someone could be all the way here in this corner, and you're still fighting, you're in the same region. This may seem a little unintuitive at first because, well, normally units have to be adjacent to each other to fight in most games. But this freedom actually starts to unlock a lot of fun hex control ideas in Ankh, which we consider to be Ankh's greatest strength. There's that basic, yeah, you want to be next to monuments so you get control of them, so you can get points and followers through them. So yeah, just be next to them at first. But Then remember this card, this drought combat card that gives you points if you're on desert? Well, now terrain is actually a big part of the game because you always want to be watching figures on desert spaces. Let's contrast this with Flood, a card that prevents your units from dying if you're on grassland, the green spaces. So watch for that too. The hex colors are not just cosmetics in this game, it's something you need to pay attention to. And this starts to get really changed once you realize that every time you build a monument, you can construct anywhere in a region, which really lets you start blocking off terrain if it doesn't suit your needs. This is just the beginning of the coolness though. The game also functions with a lot of other fun placement bonuses when it's not restricted to adjacency for combat. There's a certain technology called Temple Attuned that gives you strength if you're next to your temples, so position next to your temples. But you gotta watch out for other people blocking off those spaces so you don't get your bonuses. Or how about the Isis God Power that prevents all her units from dying if they're next to you? So maybe you want to move away from her. The biggest highlight of this is probably when you combine this adjacency with this Build Monument card. When you play the Build Monument card, it gets built right before you fight. And because of that, you can get the Temple Attuned +2 strength. And now you can win the fight. Well, that was unexpected from your opponent, and you got a monument to score points on it too. Let's tie this in with the camel mechanic. Remember these cute little guys? Well, these come in after most conflicts, where someone gets to choose where this caravan goes. They get to choose. So you can literally just be splitting regions. And now this no longer has that adjacency bonus. It's in a different region. Oh man, did someone say conflicts are going to be way different now? As long as you have the new regions be 6 or more spaces, you're golden, so camel away. Oh, and then you can also swap the new number with any of the old. So that's changing the sequencing of battles. So there's camels, adjacency bonuses, and terrain bonuses, which all makes this move action quite nuanced. With move, you get to move every single figure up to 3 spaces, even across water. So there's so much flexibility and decision making on how you want to stand in each region, how to get your own, and also block off your opponent's adjacencies. Actually, these camels get into how Ankh has some interesting progression. As you play, there will be 3 more regions, 3 more camel triggers, 3 more regions. So that means in a 4-player game, you'll start with 4 regions, and later on, you'll have 7 regions. That's a lot more calculating. Another form of progression is through these Ankh powers, which are like technology. And I know this game is literally called Ankh, so Ankh powers, the game's called Ankh, is a little confusing. Anyways, these are paced in a way to make scoring and your general power just continue to go up, making conflicts more and more exciting. These are almost always relevant. The first column generally increases your follower count. The second one just makes you stronger in combat. And the third one just opens the floodgates for a ton of points. Like how about Glorious, which triples your devotion payout for winning fights. Triples. In all, there's fun paths for winning or losing fights, having certain monuments, and also being spread out on the board. As you see here, there's a scarab when we get certain Ankh levels. When you uncover this, you get to grab a monster with cool abilities, aka Guardians of Mankind. There's 3 tiers here to get as you unlock, with bigger and bigger abilities and minis. Like look at this Satet, you can move her onto any other figure and then just push them off. That's so huge for messing with your friend's adjacency bonuses. Bye bye from the region. And then there's this Crocodile Dundee, a pimp, who just gets to spawn in water. So that means he gets to be part of multiple fights in the same phase. Or how about the biggest tier with this Androsphinx, this black hole of power, which if he's next to anyone else, he just makes them 0 strength during a fight. So you can smack this guy down, reduce everyone else to 0, just like that. Whenever you get a guardian monster dude, it just joins your army forever, increasing your army size, which is awesome. All you have to do is put a ring on it. And now it's yours forever. If it dies, you can just easily spawn it again because these cost the same as warriors, which is nothing after you perform the spawn action. So monsters will get really heavy use in this game, which is so cool to see them just changing the board state. One of the best parts is that you get 6 of these in the base game, 2 for each tier, meaning that there's going to be slight variance of games when they're mixed and matched. An epic finale is going to feel way different with this giant scorpion compared to having this soul-sucking Androsphinx out. So when we add all these options up, from the combat cards, to the adjacency ideas, to the monsters, to the Ankh powers, Ankh, the game, gives you a lot of ways to just pivot to get advantage. If your opponent's army looks scary in one part, well, maybe you don't fight them. There's so many other regions. Or maybe you do fight them, with some creativity, after you find ways to mess with their adjacency bonuses. Or maybe you do want to have a giant fight in one region to score a lot of points from unleashing a drought. Or of course, just launch a plague to deplete everyone's follower count, including theirs. You know how the regions are ordered? Well, the temptation to play this plague on your opponents is constantly ebbing and flowing, as sometimes they gain followers for winning fights, sometimes there's other plague of locusts too that happen and they're losing a bunch of followers. When multiple players are doing all these things, you can easily see how this game is just chock full of interaction. And remember, this is all happening through this interlinked action track. You just want to constantly be watching what your opponents do. And for planning, you know what? You can see everything. That follower count is changing as people win or lose fights, so you're invested in their outcomes, even if you're not there. And a good amount of the time, you'll be engaged because you're at that regions. You want to be in a lot of regions in Ankh because it gives you more opportunities. More opportunities to build monuments. More opportunities to win fights, get points. And also more opportunities to mess with your friends. Launch that Plague of Locusts. Just launch it. Just launch it. Now for you, these Egyptian gods you can play as. And these have asymmetry that's pretty straightforward and simple. We'd break this down into either being situationally strong or consistently strong. Something like Amun here is situationally strong. For one region, for one conflict phase, he can play 2 cards, 2 combat cards at once. So you can get crazy bonuses like a +4, or by playing a really strong card and then getting it back right away. On the flip side, how about Osiris, who whenever he loses a battle, he gets to put down this underworld token, which is a dead zone that no one else can go on. Haha, get it? Dead. Plus, whenever they spawn units, they can chain summon and get a warrior on all their undead tokens. Late game, spawning with Osiris can end up being a giant flood of your undead warriors. Now we get to the infamous merge mechanic. And for now, we'll just say this is a very innovative idea. It gives you a counteraction against snowballing, which definitely can happen in this game because losers of fights get completely wiped off one region. And that could be all their units, or most of them. Permanent team play is a fun frontier in area controls, and it's definitely a cool teamwork opportunity to gang up with a friend on that person that's been winning the entire game. And it's really a joint victory when you do win. The merge is just always going to happen, and that can leave you constantly looking at the devotion track and trying to play around this huge swing. What will happen if those 2 specific gods merge? Maybe I should diversify my plans in case I do end up on the bottom, because if I'm on the bottom, I lose all my monuments anyways. When we think about how these 5 different gods can get merged together, yeah, there's some decent replay value here. There's also this included scenario booklet, which gives you 10 different scenarios to play. 10. The scenarios just drop in these camels to add more regions in different ways, which is a convenient way to just easily give you more game modes. Some scenarios even add more elements like cities to control, and there's even one scenario that has double merging. Double merging! Whoa! Plus, even if you want to stick with the same scenario, you can just change your spawn location for new possibilities. And remember, you're putting down your own camels during games, in the middle of games, for new maps. For the final pro, we want to say that Ankh does a good job of focusing you as a god of Egypt. You are this god. You are Anubis, moving around the map, and you can never die off of combat. So that means that for newcomers, the game's a little more forgiving. You won't ever get wiped off the map completely. But mostly, you're encouraged to be bold with your god. Go and fight a lot with it. Doesn't matter if you lose, because gods don't die. When you go down the track to upgrade your game state, you can end up combining this invincibility with this Ankh power, called Obelisk Attuned, which lets you teleport to obelisk you control as long as you have a figure there. So then you really feel like a god as you constantly teleport your god around the map, continually adding its strength to every single fight because it can never die. Now for the cons of Ankh, and hang tight because we got a lot of nitpicks too after the cons. We start with the big con, the inevitable merging. This is a sudden wrench in game states, which isn't a bad thing per se, but you have to plan for it. The key word here is that you have to be able to plan for it. The merging can only start being workable when everyone has the same knowledge of how to get points and power dynamics, and then you start eyeing that merging and plan around it. That's not going to happen in your first or maybe even second game. On your first game, you can get just completely obliterated as you're trying stuff out, and then you just get even more punished by just losing all your units, even your god, because you have to merge. You have to do it. Then you couple that into how you can be dragging someone down who's pretty ahead of you all the way down to your level, which also makes them feel bad. In a game as easy to learn as Ankh, we get why there's not a full introductory mode, but maybe something for an introductory merge would be nice. The merging is an unfamiliar idea that is just game shattering, and there should have been something done to make it feel less swingy when you're new to the game. Maybe in your first game, they should have told you to just ignore the merge or just end the game earlier than usual. Yeah, the merging is explained on the back of these merge cards, but these are something that are given to you after you're done merging because it says merged with someone else. So you're not going to think to look on the back of these before merging is done. But hey, even when you're all used to the game and used to this merge possibility and all the point scoring, there's no guarantees that the merge god won't be too strong now. Yeah, like now it's super easy for them to just close out the game. Merging is just a very bold idea, and perhaps in a game as nuanced, competitive, and long-ish as Ankh, it just isn't a good fit. But at the same time, it can lead to some cool team comebacks you just don't see anywhere else. But of course, can. With merging being a non-decision mandatory thing you have to do, we're not even sure how you could balance it well. There's all sorts of shapes of god abilities, map layouts, point, devotion trackers. The list goes on and on. It's actually good that this merged god tends to feel on the weaker side in 4 to 5 players because if it was too strong, then people would intentionally sandbag more, and that's really wacky. To get the merging on the right path, we would have wanted to see players be able to choose whether or not the wedding happens. So the two be-wed gods get to say yes, and then they're wed. Otherwise, you just feel like you're dragged into some unholy wedding and now you lost everything and you don't even want to be with that person. If you really hate merging as an idea, there is a non-merge variant in the scenario booklet, which by the way isn't mentioned anywhere in the normal rulebook. This variant is just not really well ironed out. To counteract the merge, the game wants you to be eliminated. It makes everyone go down a lot of devotion after every single combat. In fact, moving down 12 devotion in total over the course of 3 fights. This just feels really wacky, as early game you sometimes don't want to win fights for just 3 points if you're gonna lose all of it right away. Sure, the loser does get a couple more followers, but that generally doesn't help the leader from snowballing, or a second place guy from just getting smashed, and these are all things that get checked better in games with merge, due to a big boss monster arising with the merge. Here, in early to mid game, multiple gods can realize they have 0 chance of getting out of red. There's no merge to save them, and they just spend the game either clocked out or just trying to drag down the winners so that everyone loses. Okay, let's talk about turn order. Going later in this game is just generally bad. Like later in rotation. This is because whenever anyone does an event, it triggers right after their turn, including for the conflicts. In practice, some players just have more actions than others in preparing for these conflicts, and remember, they get the final say right before this conflict happens, and look, they get the tiebreaker token. This goes hand in hand with these monument grabs. Monument grabs are so important, you need them, but there's only 3 of them before the first conflict. Due to how these action trackers work, players in earlier turn rotation tend to have an advantage in just getting these first before the first conflict. And well, yeah, if you're playing 4 to 5 players, Some players just won't get monuments at all before the first conflict. Well, you may say that it's not a big deal that you're losing out on monuments because isn't there that alternative to build your own? Yeah, you can build a monument, but then you're probably losing a fight since it gives no combat bonuses. This makes it very easy to predict what some players are going to do in combats, mostly early game, where if you can tell they need a monument, there's only one way they can get it. And guess what? They had to pay 3 followers to build that monument. Other people just got a monument as something tacked on to their action. You could say that you could get the tech to make building monuments cost no followers, but then it feels like you're forced to get that tech if you don't have early access to monuments. But there's more with the Ankh powers. By just being able to trigger these really cheap ones for your first fight, it typically means that there's a really good return on investment. Here you get 3 followers if you win a fight, and that's an insane return. So despite having to pay for these, the benefit of going first and buying them is just totally worth their one cost, as now you have a nice healthy stack of followers before or even after the first conflict. But this gets further compounded in getting these guardians, where if you're later in turn order, well, you're going to be clearing these Ankh powers a little slower. So even if you focus it 100%, chances are most, if not all of these guardians will be gone by the time you get to them. This is especially bad if your god, like Osiris, just really wants to get a lot of guardians to get more units. And now you can't do that because you were last in rotation and you played Osiris. Other people are incentivized to get Ankh powers too because, well, they're dirt cheap, always give you bonuses, and it gives them guardians, which are almost always useful to have. To start to fix all this turn order unfairness from monument grabs, less turns, and now the guardian blockage, we would have liked to see later players have more followers. Then just make researching Ankh more expensive. I mean, come on. 1 follower is a joke when you know you're just gonna get that back almost immediately. Ooh, look at all these guardians you won't get to use if you go later in turn order, which is a buzzkill, right? But then, what about going later in turn order and you don't get this guy? This giant scorpion, which is a WTF guardian. WTF. So this guy's premise is pretty cool. He can destroy monuments on the board. That's pretty cool. But the problem is that this is just way too good because you can blow up monuments before people can respond to them. Multiple monuments. We understand how this guardian can be really cool when combined with Satet, an ability that actually allows you to displace other figures, so you can react to this crazy scorpion. But if you don't get Satet because of turn order, or if she's not in your game, you can't do anything about the scorpion besides hoping you prevented it from standing there, which is nigh impossible to securely do. Just think about it. You've been spending lots of the game to build monuments and get control of neutral ones. You have all these tier 2 abilities that give you abilities off monuments, and suddenly this scorpion just comes along and says, nope, your monuments are gone. Ha 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 ha, too bad. They're not even turn neutral. Like, why? Why is this so overpowered? Why not have it be after combat so you can respond to it? Or why not make it a bid? Or why not have it just destroy 1 monument instead of 2 or 3 that it currently can do? God, this is just so crazy when it comes out late game. Now let's go to the tier 1 techs, these ones that increase your follower count throughout the game. We want to zoom in on one of them called Revered, which just seems underpowered. If you get Revered, it is when you use the gain followers action, you get 1 more follower. Okay, this seems okay, right? It's a small buff permanently to one of your actions. But then compare this to Omnipresent, where at the start of a conflict, you gain 1 follower for each region you have figures. Okay, well, let's count that up. So you have at least 1 for your god, okay, that's 1, and then you probably have some warriors on the board. Okay, so let's say you'll get like 2 to 3 on average. You get the followers for Omnipresent before combat, right before combat triggers, which means you'll never go into combat without followers, even if you're caught off guard. Going into combat with 0 followers is a lot more likely early game, which is when you would research these abilities. Revered is just typically subpar early game, and then just falls off considerably later when a +1 follower boost doesn't mean much. It should have been given some chance to get bigger. Okay, there we go. Now you can continue to scale this up and up. Now for the rest of the player count cons, and this game just doesn't work at 3 players. With merging at 3p, you're forced into a 1v2, 1v1, 1v1.5, as one guy has to take on the merged team by himself. The thing about this merged team is that they're able, with these new merged rules, to do the same action twice in a row, giving them so much control over these trackers. We also do want to warn quickly that in 2 players, some of the god matchups just don't work. Isis will hard counter Anubis, since Isis is all about preventing units from dying, and Anubis needs enemies to die to get his bonus. Then in 2p, one of the smaller maps just has the undead god Osiris be too strong, since the black hole death zones he puts down just gives him the same multiplayer control on a smaller map. You probably just want to limit him to 2 death zones. Okay, nitpicks time, and this is when the floodgates really start to open. Let's go back to the merging. Because this is guaranteed every game, it can lead to some weird sandbagging mindsets. This could have been totally intentional, where the game wants you to feed your later teammate if you're securely in 3rd place. Or if you're securely in 3rd place, well, you don't really focus on getting points because that doesn't really matter, and you want to focus on tearing down the 1st and 2nd place players for after the merge. So in practice, 2 players can be playing a whole different type of game as early as after the first fight when they realize they're really behind. This is not nearly as bad if everyone is around the same skill level with the game, where the early tight competition for the non-merge place between many people is very exciting. But chances are you won't have a group like that, at least for a while, so sandbagging can be more common. To try to solve this crippling desire to sandbag, why not put some non-guarantees on merging, as we talked about in the cons, where both merged gods get to choose whether the wedding happens. Let's bounce to this action track system now. This is a really fun idea in theory to tie players together. The problem is that you're so tied together that it can start infringing on the realm of losing your own choices. People can sometimes be deciding your turn for you. In many cases in this game, you'll be put in this situation where either you should start the event yourself, or don't start it and let the person after you start the event. But in most cases, you want to start the event because it's just good for you. Getting a monument, that's good. Getting the camels. Yeah, you want to be the person putting down this region-altering camel thing, right? And then the last one, fighting. Yeah, you want to start the conflict on your own terms and get this tiebreaker token. So as you try to counterplay the other people, there's a common instance where you just have to do an action that you don't really want to do to prevent them from getting that event. In 2 players, this action tracker actually shines because there's only one other person influencing the track, giving you a lot of control over it. If your turn is just doing one action, it's not a big deal because there's way less downtime. You can more easily predict how that one person is going to move the action track, leading to more counterplay. This action track here is a sword that Ankh boasts in 2 players and gets stabbed a little bit by in multiplayer. It's not a complete lack of agency most of the time, but the fact that it's so interlinked, with half of these actions being very basic, means that turns can get dumbed down sometimes. And if you're used to other big box games that Ankh seems to resemble, well, maybe that's a feeling you don't like. For a quick change, we would have liked to see an option to spend followers to prevent the track from moving up. Let's get to the multiplayer, and at bigger counts like 4 to 5, the map can start to feel a little chaotic, especially more so at 5. This is because the move action lets you move all your figures, and lets you move it through other people and through water. So basically, if you move, well, you can move everything like crazy, and you're crossing all these different boundaries, and when multiple people do that, yeah, that can just be a lot just changing. Sure, you have some semblance of predicting this if these trackers are in the right place, but sometimes people do play unorthodox-like and move these in a weird order. So movement is hard to predict, and to a bit of a lesser extent, the fighting as well. Fighting is not an end of round thing or action, it's linked to the track, where everyone has a small push, And for a game with low politics, this can be very hard to predict. But two-player comes in to save the day again, where if one person's moving like crazy for 3 spaces, well, if you're going back to back, that's not that big of a deal, and there's just less units on the board in general. So now we get to these followers that are blindly just following your god. And the follower consumption in this game, to leverage these poor souls, this actually feels lacking. There just doesn't seem to be a consistent way to spend these later in the game, and players can end up having huge stacks of followers just sit there. The most obvious reason to get followers is for the Ankh research, but this is actually dirt cheap if you think about it. It only costs 12 followers to do every single tier, and the first tier all helps your follower count, so you're going to be able to easily pay for tier 2 and 3. You may be saying, but wait, isn't there a card called the Plague of Locusts that you need to save followers for? In some fights, especially at smaller player counts, it just won't happen at all. This is because there's 6 other cards that are all good in their own ways. Remember, there's ways to build monuments, there's ways to get points through fighting, and those are things that can come up first when thinking about what to play during a conflict. Let's compare this to Rising Sun, another one of Eric M. Lang's games, where you are using followers guaranteed every single fight on 4 trackers. Whereas in Ankh, most of the time, you're not really spending much followers at all. Sure, it does cost 3 followers to build a monument, but almost every single first tier Ankh ability you can research makes that cost feel like nothing at all. It's extremely likely you'll just finish all your Ankh research by halfway through the game because they're so good and cheap. And then this bottom action, unlock Ankh power, just doesn't do anything for the rest of the game. Like, there's only 4 actions in this game and one of them just got blotted out. To start to fix this, we would have liked to see follower spending be more of a part of the game. Like as we said before, spending followers to maybe prevent this from moving up. Or how about a combat card where it's kind of like Plague of Locusts, but instead of bidding to kill units, you're bidding to increase your power strength. That would be pretty fun. So this follower thing just gets us into more of the progression nitpicks. Now we praised parts of progression before, but a lot of the progression parts are actually kind of wonky, and that's why this is in the nitpicks, not the cons. Remember these guys, the airdrop camels that just make more regions? In many conflict-heavy games, game states tend to get more tense because that map is getting smaller, or you just have more dudes to populate it. In Ankh, you don't really have that many more units, you only unlock guardians, of which you'll rarely get all 3 of, and that will just put you under the 3 additional regions that will come up. The map doesn't get bigger in Ankh, it's actually getting tighter in terms of individual hex management, but now you're spreading out people's forces across more regions. More fights do happen, but sometimes people just don't have the resources to fight in all those new regions, and many regions can get dominated scot-free later in the game, which feels anticlimactic. Just having more regions also means that fighting over Monument Majority just isn't that competitive, as you can just bam, easily walk over to somewhere else to contest monuments there. The adjacency is always important for some technologies, but the quantity of how many you have in each region, not so much. But hey, maybe you just really like this idea of more regions where you have more places to dominate and you just like smaller fights. So that's why this is the nitpicks. But for us to start, we would have liked to see maybe less camels in the game, like maybe have it only trigger 2 times instead of 3, so there's 1 less region you have to worry about. Now we already said that Ankh powers feel too cheap to research, and followers just tend to stack up high later in the game. And this huge mass of followers just gets ridiculously fiddly when the numbers start to exceed 10, where the game doesn't have 3x or 5x markers, and man, counting all of these can be a pain in the butt. You definitely can't easily pinpoint your opponent's follower count when it looks like that. Maybe dials would have worked here? Right, so the next nitpick is that monument stealing feels extremely swingy. Early to mid game, monument taking is just fine. You're simply just taking over a neutral monument. But then when all the neutral monuments are taken, then you can steal, which means you take off someone else's marker and replace it with your own. Wait, what? Really? This just went from a getting something to taking something from your opponent and putting your thing on it too. Let's play it out, okay? Let's say you do trigger this monument grab. Then you get to choose, okay, the last neutral monument. Okay, that one has to be yours. And then now whoever goes after you, if they trigger any other monument grabs, they can now choose any monument they're adjacent to and just take it. What? It could be multiple monuments they get to choose from. This is not only more flexible because you have more options to steal from, but also you're stealing. So this is just stronger. You're stealing something. We wonder if there could be a way for the game to introduce more neutral monuments, like perhaps instead of some of the camel insertions, and that would add counterplay around monument stealing. Alternatively, the game could just add a battle card that lets you affect other people's monuments, since that doesn't exist, and then replace the monument stealing to just taking off their control. Okay, so now let's get to the theme misfire nitpicks. This is where the marketing for Ankh could definitely start leading you really astray. Let's read the introduction, okay? Okay. Change has come to the land of Nile, and with change came woe. The mightiest deities of Egypt gather their strength, marshal their devoted, and march to war. This is all hyping you up for an epic conflict in ancient Egypt with bloodshed and warriors. But the conflict phase is called a conflict phase, not a combat phase, because one of your key actions in this game, build monument, is directly in that phase. That's the only way you can build monuments in this game. Playing build a monument during fighting will almost always lose you the fight. So, for a game all supposedly about war and bloodshed, let's make the river Nile run red with our blood, right? Well, yeah, sometimes in Ankh, you just want to build a monument and have your warriors not fight and go into construction. Yay, we're dead, but I mean, at least we built something cool with our weapons. Let's look at some of these other cards too. Drought. This gives you a lot of points, but shouldn't a drought be bad? Like bad for everyone? Why is it helping you? Then there's the flood, which protects you, but shouldn't a flood just be killing everything? What? And when we look at the actual fighting, well, it doesn't matter where you are in a region. If you're in this corner, some guys over here, some guys over here, you're still fighting. And that further abstracts this war mindset. Then there's the camels that make zero sense thematically. You're having this epic fight for the ages to see who will become the leader in this new age of monotheism. And then this camel caravan just shows up and influences this fight? Really? You're gods. Can't you just kill the camels if they're in your way? This is an odd theme choice, and maybe they're just trying to be cute because you literally have the River Nile on the board. Why not say this is just flooding more regions? You could also argue that it's really annoying that people still score for their monument majority even when they lose the fight, which is kind of weird. The only way around that is through Plague of Locusts, but then that doesn't kill your god, which I guess is thematic, but then it does feel weird to get points for devotion even when your god is shrouded with a bunch of locusts over it. Like, wouldn't the holiness of your god just be temporarily clouded? And to wrap it up, there's just a lot of invulnerability effects, like the aforementioned flood, or how about this entire god, Isis? Her warriors frequently just don't die through combat, so she can lose a bajillion fights and just be on the board chilling. You could joke that Ankh could feel like a worker placement at times, where you're putting down your warrior worker to have him build you a monument, and yeah, then he's expended his job, he dies. But he built you a monument. One worker, one monument. Okay, now for time length. Multiplayer games tend to be longer than the 90 minutes that CMON suggests, especially in your first games. And it's gonna take more about like 3 to 4 hours in your first run. A big reason behind this is the novel merge mechanic that can change a lot of decision making in weird, unexpected ways, because this is a new thing in these types of games. But another big reason is just the big amount of information on the board. Wow, that's a lot of adjacency things and hex control you want to keep track of. Oh, and then moving can slow down the game because you can move every piece, and remember, moving is practically unrestricted, so each figure can move into so many different regions, all the possibilities. Then in late game, there are just more fights, and then potentially multiple swarms of locusts, which can slow down the pacing of things. The actions just keep moving the events forward, so the game will end, it doesn't drag. Now let's talk about some of the quick component nitpicks. You see these gods? They're probably just a little too big. They're so tall that they end up blocking some things on the board, especially monuments. Do you see that? These 2D monuments. Yeah, I don't think you can see those behind these huge, fat, tall gods. And then for some reason, these feel very light and cheapy. They're lighter than the Guardians, which is weird because you're gonna be moving these around more of the time. Like, can you hear that? Like when I'm touching this wing, it just feels so cheap. These bigger minis in general just have this platform that also ends up blocking this Osiris Underworld token. So yeah, sometimes you'll just forget about the Underworld token, which is not a good thing. All these bigger minis could definitely be smaller, especially the base and the height, without sacrificing much of the game. It's also funny because the god minis are so unique and big, but then every single god has the exact same symbol for ownership of pieces. Just 5 different colors, despite all the cool lore you can use. Okay, last real nitpick, promise. There are just a lot of little pieces in this game and not that many plastic bags included, so you probably have to get some of your own. But now, for the nitpicking bonus round, we got the Kickstarter exclusive, the crowdfunding Tomb of Wonders. Oh boy. Okay, so this guy is just chock full of bling. Now, of course, we didn't test the mechanics here, but just from a component standpoint, we were sorely disappointed in a lot of things. Many of the plastic pieces here just feel really cheap. Like these follower tokens and these region markers, they're so cheap feeling. Like these bling plastic markers are actually each lighter than these cardboard tokens for followers. So why would you use these? Same goes with these region markers. They're lighter than the cardboard region markers. Now we get to the recommender score, where we try to critically evaluate the game given the aforementioned pros and cons. And Ankh Gods of Egypt is gonna get a 5 out of 10. It's actually just average. Okay, so there's a merge in this game and the action track is rather simple, but don't be fooled. Ankh is actually one of the most cutthroaty and snowbally games that novices will just get smashed in. With its zero randomness, Ankh is incredibly competitive, and if at least one person falls extremely behind, well then now 2 merged people are out of the game. But on the flip side, even if you get good at this game, how can you even account for the merge god now not being overpowered and having too many points? The major peeve with the merging has to be how stiff it is. There's no choices in triggering it, and we would argue that it actually shadows out any nuanced diplomacy in this game, since power levels get so thrown out of whack. Yeah, the merging should start to get better once people get more experience with the game, but there's still no guarantees on balance. If you try to ignore the merge completely, well, this game is victim to snowballing, where the monument control is all based off of these specific events, and then there's a lot of unorthodox ways to get points, so politics doesn't help that much. When we're playing Ankh, we just can't help but shake the feeling that it's rushed, like we're playing a prototype. The action marker, incredible intertwinedness, and merging feel like something that is better in a shorter, more lighthearted game, yet mid to late game fights are far from lighthearted. Oh my gosh, look at all that adjacency you need to keep track of. Once you see past the gloss of the minis and the merge, follower numbers just don't seem to line up, and pacing is funky. And maybe Ankh is just doomed to be weak anyways, because even if you solved our problems with the jank, there's still the merge system that has to be completely overhauled for it to be consistently good. And at that point, well, this is a different game. But now for 2-player, which really feels like the holy saving grace in all the unholy marriages that happen in this game. And that's the mode that is propping up this score. This is where the main juice of the game, the adjacency thoughtfulness, and the other big selling point, the action tracker, just work really well. Ankh refuses to change anything about the game besides shorter action trackers for player count, and the more actions in 2P just feels excellent in preparing for conflicts. But for all of our praise here, Ankh was not meant to be a primarily 2-player game, so be warned. While you do have much more control over the fights, if you lose one crucial fight, you're basically out of the game. The point scoring was based off of merging being the intent for comebacks, and there's just no merge in 2P, which is also why it's hilariously good. If you want to just buy Ankh for 2P, it does feel a little inefficient given all the unused content here and this big box for a not so long game, but 2 players is still the most sound way to play Ankh. But now, big picture time. How does Ankh compare to these guys? Blood Rage and Rising Sun, the other 2 games of this Eric Lang area control trilogy. Ankh has the tons of region sequence battles of Rising Sun, but with bidding being a fraction of the relevance that it is in Rising Sun, where you bid 4 times for every fight. In Ankh, many times you won't be bidding at all. In fact, for combat, the system is more similar to the simplicity of Blood Rage, where you just play 1 card, and that's it. We do want to point out that Ankh's asymmetry actually feels the simplest out of all 3 of these games, mostly because there's no emergent asymmetry at all. This isn't a bad thing, but we do want to warn that there is very clear technology and strategy paths for a great deal many of the gods. Like Osiris will almost always get the free monument build early because his ability relies on him losing early game fights. Once you figure these out, the already simple god abilities can feel minimal, and you can just easily predict what Ankh upgrades people grab. Compare this to Blood Rage, where you're routinely getting new, fresh abilities from the draft that your faction now has. Or Rising Sun, where you're getting new season cards to get points for you. And even then, the faction abilities are more nuanced, like these Turtle Clan's turtles that are spawn points and warriors. For Ankh, there really isn't that combo potential from combining those cool abilities, and there's no novelty of seeing emergent tech theory crafting. Again, we have to go back to the merge here, where a lot of the asymmetry feels dumbed down to make the merge work. Combined gods would be too strong if god abilities were too nuanced. Ankh is relying on the merges and camel region splitting for bigger changes, instead of the emergent card specialties that these other 2 have. Ankh's overarching strategies for each god may be simpler, but because everything is perfect information, seasoned Ankh players may just really like how you can predict the game pretty well. Now, while we haven't done a full review on these 2 games yet, we would score both of them as a recommender score much higher than Ankh, even though I personally hate Rising Sun, but I can respect it. If you want an area control for game night, perhaps an inconsistent and polarizing merge mechanic isn't the thing you want to spend your time on. But if you want to play something at 2 players, Ankh has that, which these 2 don't have. And Ankh does its 2 players surprisingly well. My personal score for Ankh is going to be a 4 out of 10. I have a below average time with it. Ankh fits this weird space in my head. It's competitive with open information and decent point swings with unorthodox scoring, but then has merging? Merging. Why am I allowed to build monuments during fighting? Why is merging being forced down our throats for something that seems to take itself very seriously? Admittedly, in the beginning of games, I'm filled with hope for Ankh. Teaching and doing actions is so simple, monument grabbing makes sense, and bloodshed does come. And it's very satisfying to win fights, especially with drought. But then, in mid-game, it starts to go all downhill. First, I realized that the god powers are just so basic, I tend to get really bored by them. There really needs to be one more card for each player that they can play in combat to spice things up, but then again, because of merging, I understand why that's not in the game. Isis and Osiris are cool, but the rest of them just feel pretty soulless to me. This splitting is interesting, but in practice, oh my god, why are there more regions now that's actually slowing down combat and can actually screw with people's strategies? Actually, for combat, this funnily enough feels way too basic. Why is there not more ways to bid and use more followers? Or why is there not more cards that give decent combat bonuses besides chariots? Maybe the game could have benefited by at least one more aggro card for everyone, because when I play games like these, I want to fight, and the game only has 2 cards that consistently help you in battle. Then this ability that we brought up in the pros, Obelisk Attuned, is just anti-fun for me in multiplayer. Here, people are just constantly teleporting around units with their obelisks, and oh my gosh, that's so much movement that can happen that I don't even want to start to predict that. It just feels like utter work as I look at everyone being able to teleport. I'm looking at their follower count to see how they can threaten Plague of Locusts, and oh my god, will they even teleport at all? All too often, our group just felt bad for the merged gods as the game came to a close, and that feeling of guilt all around really took away from the satisfaction of anyone's win. And then the theme. Oh, I like this Egyptian mythos thing, but at some point, the theme just ends up making a utter mockery of itself for me. But this actual low theming works well in 2 players, and that's why this score is not lower. With less people, the board state is actually so much easier to keep track of. There we go. The board state is just so much easier to keep track of with Obelisk Attuned. I'm okay with that in just 2 players. For me, Ankh works best when I set my expectations for epicness to bare bottom, because it's constantly so cheesy that it's not epic. So if I just abstract all of it completely, it's okay. I'll end with this. I keep thinking the merge would have been better if this game was shorter, like an hour. When teamwork is forced in games, I usually tend to approach it a little more lightheartedly, but since this is not a lighthearted game, I just tend to clog out in multiplayer. Thank you to Shadow for letting me borrow this copy of Ankh, and thank you to our patrons for making videos like this possible. We got Manuel G, Brian C, Clifford H, Aaron W, Max B, Bora, Jeremy M, C, Charlie P, Quinton S, Samus, Travis R, Alpha Y, Vance K, Ryan D, Jennifer L, Brett M, Matt G, Peter Z, Spinner 71, Ryan J, Brad G, Tiamo Period, Mark A, James M, Evan B, Charles B Jr., Josh J, Bassbar, Rado, Sophie, Reiner Z, Colin Allen, Hudson T, Pearson B, Omar F, MY, Ethan P, Bradley J, John C, Galvin V, Dirk S, Andy C, SX Co, Alex L, Rob R, Sando22, and Dave F. We also got 2 Mad Lads of cardboard. We got ZL and Jeff L. We got that guy there. We also got 1 Mad Lady of cardboard. We got Amy. So yes, let me know what you thought of Ankh if you played it, or just what you think about merging in games in general. And if there's anything on the god balance I missed, please let me know. Anyways, see you guys later. Oh, if you play the Kickstarter stuff, let me know about that too, because I haven't tried the Kickstarter gods. Okay, anyways, remember to like, subscribe. See you guys later. Bye-bye.